gives existence to various creatures. And out of dust, God creates the first man, Adam, and breathed into him the breath of life.
Before she drew her last breath, Eve, often remembered only as the first transgressor, might have been the first witness, the keeper of memory, and the voice of revelation. Hidden for centuries in the remote monasteries of the Ethiopian highlands, manuscripts in Ge'ez preserve a tradition of Eden that goes far beyond the familiar Genesis account. European scholars first glimpsed these revelations in the 19th century, and now we will show what Eve revealed about Eden, and the Ethiopian Bible confirms it. The earliest scriptural accounts. In the beginning, according to the oldest textual traditions we have, the world as we know it was empty, unshaped and quiet. The Hebrew Bible, known to scholars as the Book of Genesis, opens with a rhythm of creation: light from darkness, land from water, sky from the abyss. By the sixth day, the stage is set for the most consequential act in human history, the creation of Adam, in the land eastward in Eden, a phrase scholars like Nahum Sana have noted likely represents the Fertile Crescent region, cradle of early agriculture and river civilizations. God breathes life into Adam, and for the first time, the world holds a human being who can reason, feel, and choose. But Adam was not meant to be alone. Genesis 2:18 introduces a turning point. God observes Adam's solitude and declares, "It is not good for the man to be alone." To correct this, God creates Eve from Adam himself. A rib is taken from his side and fashioned into the first woman. This detail has long fascinated theologians and anthropologists. But this is far from the only mystery in this story. It only gets more complicated as we dive deeper. The Hebrew word Isha literally ties woman to man, or Ish, establishing Eve not only as a companion, but as integral to Adam's existence. The moment is transformative. Adam names her woman because she is taken from man, and together they inhabit the Garden of Eden, a place described as lush, watered by rivers, filled with fruit-bearing trees, and alive with creatures that pose no threat. Genesis specifies one tree, however, that they must not touch: the tree of the knowledge of good and evil. This is no ordinary tree. Scholars such as Ellen van Wold have argued that in Hebrew, the verb tense implies a prohibition so absolute that to disobey it would alter the very trajectory of human consciousness. And so, the narrative tension builds. Enter the serpent, described in Genesis 3:1 as cunning, a creature capable of reasoning and persuasion. The serpent engages Eve in conversation, questioning the prohibition and suggesting that disobedience will not bring death, but understanding. Eve eats the fruit. She offers it to Adam. And then their eyes are opened, shame is realized, and they perceive their nakedness. For the first time, mortality, vulnerability, and moral awareness enter human life. God confronts them, and the expulsion from Eden follows. Genesis 3:23-24 recounts that Adam and Eve are driven from the garden and that cherubim with a flaming sword are placed to guard the tree of life. They must labor for their survival, and the earth itself is cursed to yield thorns and thistles. Yet Eve is not defined solely by her misstep. Genesis 3:20 introduces a title that resonates through millennia. She is the mother of all living. Scholars like Phyllis Tribble highlight that this designation reflects Eve's creative and sustaining role. This narrative, of course, is not confined to Hebrew scripture. In the Quran, a parallel account emerges, with notable differences. While the Garden of Eden appears in several chapters, most prominently Surah Al-Baqarah and Surah Al-A'raf, both Adam and his partner share responsibility for eating from the forbidden tree. The Quranic text emphasizes that Satan tempted both of them, and the resulting fall is framed as a shared human error, not the sole fault of the woman. God teaches Adam and Eve repentance, and the emphasis is on God's mercy and the possibility of restoration. Islamic scholars such as Fazlur Rahman note that the Quran presents the event as the beginning of moral consciousness and the necessity of human accountability. Across both traditions, one theme is clear: the creation of Eve, the shared experience in Eden, the confrontation with mortality, and the designation of Eve as life-bearer establish the moral and existential framework for human life. For modern readers, these accounts also carry archaeological and linguistic echoes. Eden's rivers, often associated with the Tigris, Euphrates, Pishon, and Gihon, correspond to regions that produced some of the earliest human settlements around 4000 to 3000 BCE. The moral story is entwined with environmental and cultural history, humans learning to cultivate, to govern, to survive. Eve's role as mother of all living anchors her as not only progenitor, but symbol of human resilience. But what secrets does the Ethiopian Bible hold? Ethiopian Christian tradition and its textual heritage. High in the rugged highlands of Ethiopia, where jagged peaks pierce the sky and valleys hold whispers of ancient civilizations, a remarkable literary tradition quietly survived for centuries. The Ethiopian Bible, in its canonical sections, mirrors the narratives found in Western Christian Bibles. Among these is the familiar Genesis account of Adam and Eve, creation, the Garden of Eden, the forbidden tree, and the expulsion. But the Ethiopian Bible is not merely a translation, it is a window into a culture that saw sacred texts as living vessels of memory, history, and moral authority. The Ethiopian Bible, preserved in the ancient Semitic language of Ge'ez, is remarkable for its breadth. Whereas the Protestant Bible contains 66 books and the Catholic Bible 73, the Ethiopian Orthodox Tewahedo canon includes 81 to 83 books, depending on the tradition, integrating texts long lost elsewhere. Among these are the Book of Enoch and the Book of Jubilees, writings that Western Christianity largely excluded from canonical collections. These texts contain expansive theological visions, apocalyptic prophecies, and genealogical histories that situate humanity in a cosmic drama of creation, sin, and redemption. The Book of Enoch, for instance, preserves vivid accounts of fallen angels, celestial journeys, and prophetic revelations. Scholars date the earliest layers of Enoch to approximately 300 BCE, with redaction continuing until around 100 CE. Its survival in Ethiopia is unique. While Greek and Latin manuscripts disappeared or were ignored by Western authorities, the Ge'ez translations endured, safeguarded in monasteries such as Debre Libanos Monastery and Lake Tana monasteries. Historian and philologist E. A. Wallace Budge, who spent decades cataloguing Ethiopic manuscripts in the late 19th and early 20th centuries, marveled at the depth of this preservation. He wrote extensively on how these texts reflect a continuity of religious imagination that vanished from the rest of the Christian world. The Book of Jubilees, another central text preserved in Ethiopia, provides a chronologically detailed recounting of Genesis, sometimes called the Lesser Genesis. Written in Hebrew in the 2nd century BCE, Jubilees breaks history into periods of 49-year jubilees and amplifies stories of Adam and Eve, Abraham, and the patriarchs. For scholars like George W. E. Nicholsberg, its Ethiopic survival offers unparalleled insight into how early Jewish communities interpreted sacred history and infused it with ritual, law, and moral instruction. The Tewahedo Church's integration of Jubilees into its canon reflects a theological philosophy that the divine story is expansive, layered, and intimately tied to human memory. Ethiopia's preservation of these texts was not accidental. During the first millennium CE, Ethiopia was relatively isolated from both the Mediterranean Christian centers and the Islamic caliphates, expanding along the Red Sea. This geographical separation provided a buffer for textual traditions that elsewhere might have been lost. Monks in the highlands of Amhara and Tigray meticulously copied manuscripts onto parchment, often in scrolls or codices bound with leather. By the 13th century, the monasteries had accumulated vast collections of scriptures, commentaries, and apocryphal works. apocryphal expansions of the Adam and Eve story. Modern scholarship has gradually illuminated the significance of Ethiopia's textual heritage. August Dillman, working in the mid-19th century, was among the first Western scholars to systematically study Ethiopic manuscripts. Dillman published critical editions of the Psalms and portions of the Old Testament in Ge'ez, demonstrating the unique preservation of texts like Enoch and Jubilees. Later, scholars such as Solomon Caesar Malan translated these works into English, making them accessible to a global audience while emphasizing the meticulous care with which Ethiopian monks had preserved them for centuries. Unlike the canonical Ethiopian Bible, this text was never fully incorporated into the sacred canon, yet it offers some of the richest expansions of early biblical imagination, blending theology, morality, and human drama. The origins of this work are difficult to pinpoint with absolute certainty, but textual historians place its composition somewhere between the 5th and 7th centuries CE, likely within Christian communities in Ethiopia or nearby regions where Ge'ez, a Semitic language closely related to ancient South Arabian scripts, was flourishing. Researchers such as August Dillman and E.A. Wallace Budge noted that the language and stylistic markers suggest a period of rich theological creativity when Ethiopian Christianity was forging its distinctive canon and identity, simultaneously engaging with Judeo-Christian traditions from the broader Near East. The narrative itself reads like a survival thriller. The Garden of Eden is gone, and with it, the security, light, and innocence that Adam and Eve once knew. They are thrust into a harsh world, forced to contend with hunger, exposure, and the moral complexities of human existence. In these pages, Eve is not a mere footnote in Adam's story. She is a strategist, a moral compass, and a witness to the cosmic struggle between good and evil. The text details how Satan, no longer a subtle tempter but an active adversary, continues to pursue them, challenging their choices, testing their faith, and attempting to undermine humanity from the very beginning. The manuscript's description of time and place is compelling. The story tracks Adam and Eve across a terrain described with striking specificity. Highlands of rolling stone, river valleys lined with sparse vegetation, and hidden caves that provide temporary refuge. In one passage, Eve must secure food for her family while confronting deceptive spirits. These elements suggest that the author was not merely retelling Genesis, but creating a lived, tangible world that early Ethiopian Christians could visualize and internalize, much as modern readers experience historical thrillers. Despite its absence from the official canon, the text was carefully preserved. Monks in monasteries such as Debre Damo Monastery and Lake Tana monasteries safeguarded it, copying the manuscript by hand onto parchment and binding it with leather, sometimes embellishing the margins with symbolic motifs. Scholars estimate that hundreds of these manuscripts were in circulation by the 12th century. However, only a fraction survived European exploration and the later upheavals of the 19th and 20th centuries. Solomon Caesar Malan and E.A. Wallace Budge were among the first Western scholars to translate portions of this text from Ge'ez into English. The conflict in the text is multifaceted. On one level, it is external: encounters with Satan, predatory animals, and environmental hardships. On another, it is psychological. Adam and Eve wrestle with guilt, responsibility, and the trauma of exile. Eve, in particular, is portrayed as carrying the memory of Eden like a torch. She remembers the unbroken light, the rivers, the animals, and the divine presence, and she struggles to instill this knowledge in her children. Scholars such as Phyllis Tribal and Carol Myers note that this apocryphal tradition portrays Eve in an unusually proactive light for early religious literature. She is not passive. Instead, she remembers and must transmit both knowledge and resilience to the next generation. One of the text's most striking features is its attention to continuity and ritual. The narrative emphasizes lineage, the care of offspring, and even the creation of early rites, suggesting that Adam and Eve were understood not just as moral exemplars, but as cultural progenitors. The manuscript also preserves genealogical details absent from canonical texts, aligning with broader Ethiopic traditions like the Book of Jubilees, and situates humanity in a long historical arc that extends well beyond Eden. Ethiopian Christianity offers a window into a vivid theological imagination. It illustrates how early communities interpreted the moral and existential questions posed by Genesis. What does it mean to fall? How does humanity contend with evil? How can memory, knowledge, and ethical responsibility be transmitted across generations? Rediscovery and scholarly translation of Ethiopic texts. In the mid-19th century, European scholars turned to the rich spiritual and literary tradition of Ethiopia, including apocryphal expansions of Genesis, like the conflict of Adam and Eve with Satan. August Dillman spearheaded the study, cataloguing manuscripts from Tigray and Amhara monasteries in the 1840s, and identifying texts, likely composed between the 5th and 7th centuries CE, that extended the Adam and Eve story beyond the canonical account. These small, annotated codices reflected centuries of Ethiopian Christian thought carefully preserved in isolation. The work attracted Solomon Caesar Malan, who in 1882 produced the first English translation. Malan's work sparked a new wave of interest, but it was just the beginning. The late 19th and early 20th centuries saw further systematic cataloguing and analysis by scholars such as E. A. Wallace Budge, who had spent decades at the British Museum examining Ethiopic manuscripts. Budge's studies extended beyond translation. He compared different manuscript traditions, analysed marginalia, and traced textual variants. He noted that some manuscripts differed significantly in details, such as the names of rivers, angels, or specific episodes of Adam and Eve's trials, highlighting centuries of editorial care and theological reflection. Budge also emphasized the historical importance of the manuscripts themselves, noting that their survival depended on the vigilance of Ethiopian monastic communities in monasteries like Debre Libanos Monastery and the cliffside Debre Damo Monastery, which had protected these texts from fire, flood, and foreign conquest for hundreds of years. European scholars often had to negotiate with local clergy, navigate remote mountain paths, and contend with manuscripts that were brittle, water-stained, or damaged by centuries of handling. Some codices had been written in as many as 5 or 6 hands. Dillman and Malan noted that even the smallest notations, such as a stroke of ink or a smudge of candle wax, provided critical clues about the text's transmission, its intended use, and the community that revered it. Today, fragments of these manuscripts survive, but they have transformed our understanding of early Christian literature. It revealed Eve not merely as a figure of fall and caution, but as a custodian of memory and a moral agent. Eve's perspective and modern scholarly interpretations. If we treat Eve's story metaphorically, as if she could speak from the edge of life, as in before her literary death, her testimony reveals far more than the simple cautionary tale we were taught in Sunday school. Modern scholars have spent decades reading Genesis and its expansions. Phyllis Treibel, a seminal voice in feminist biblical scholarship, has argued that Eve is far more than a passive participant in the fall. In her 1978 work, God and the Rhetoric of Sexuality, Treibel analyzes the Hebrew text with a forensic lens, noting that the narrative positions Eve as active, reasoning, and central to the story of human awareness. Treibel emphasizes that Eve's dialogue with the serpent is not mindless temptation. It is deliberation, curiosity, and the exercise of moral choice. She interprets the act of eating from the tree of knowledge as a pivotal moment in the moral awakening of humanity. This marks the transition from instinctual obedience to self-aware responsibility. Viewed metaphorically, it is as if Eve, even after centuries of exile, is recounting not her failure, but her role in catalyzing consciousness itself. Complementing Treibel's insights, Carol Myers situates Eve firmly within the material and social realities of the ancient Near East. Writing extensively in Discovering Eve, Myers contextualizes the Genesis narrative against archaeological and textual evidence of early agricultural societies in the Levant and Mesopotamia, roughly 3000 to 2000 BCE. She highlights that the skills Eve is credited with, such as gathering, cultivating, nurturing, and teaching, reflect the indispensable contributions of women to human survival. In this lens, Eve is not merely the mother of all living in a theological sense. She is the practical architect of life, transmitting knowledge of plants, soil, and social cooperation. Her expulsion from Eden is thus both symbolic and practical. It signals the shift from paradise to a human world where survival and ingenuity are inseparable. Tikva Freimer-Kensky, in the Wake of the Goddesses, adds yet another layer of interpretation. She reads the Genesis account as a story of transition, from innocence to awareness, from natural instinct to moral and intellectual agency. For Freimer-Kensky, Eve is the fulcrum of this transition. It is her perception, her questioning, and ultimately her engagement with knowledge that marks the human journey. She frames the narrative as an allegorical map, showing that awareness is inseparable from risk, loss, and ethical responsibility. Metaphorically, Eve's reflections serve as both a warning and a guide. The story of humanity is a story of engagement with the unknown. These modern interpretations are amplified by the apocryphal literature preserved in Ethiopia. The conflict of Adam and Eve with Satan offers a vivid imagining of Eve's reflective voice. In these Ethiopic manuscripts, Eve survives the exile from Eden not only physically, but as the bearer of memory. She guides Adam, instructs her children, and maintains the moral and cosmic blueprint of paradise. The narrative emphasizes her knowledge of light, rivers, and divine order. It details her encounters with Satan and her strategic maneuvering to preserve her lineage. Metaphorically, we can picture Eve as standing at the threshold of history, her eyes fixed on a lost paradise, her mind cataloguing every detail of light, river, and moral challenge. Modern scholarship interprets this not as myth alone, but as a narrative of human resilience and ethical awakening. Eve, in this sense, is the first reflective human, and not a sinner. Well, that's it for now. Thanks for watching. Did you like this video? If you did, please consider liking, dropping a comment, and hitting the subscribe button so that you don't miss out on our new uploads. Also, don't miss this video you see on your screen right now. It's truly unbelievable.